So hello everyone, we are in our 6th lecture as a part of our revision series for the upcoming prelims 2025, and the theme for today's discussion would be the different political associations that were formed in British India before the beginning of Indian National Congress, right. So I would say that this is a part of a larger theme, the larger theme being the different bodies, organizations, the different personalities associated with those bodies, the publications issued by these bodies, and the objectives, agenda, and the success and failures of these bodies, right. So that is a larger theme, and since we cannot discuss about all the different bodies, because there are bodies which are socio-religious reform bodies, then there are bodies which are revolutionary bodies, then there are organizations which were formed for the protection of Muslims' interests, for Hindus' interests like Hindu Mahasabha, right, and then there are left-leaning bodies. So there are just so many bodies and organizations formed in different periods of time in our modern India, right. So we cannot make a discussion of all of that as a part of a revision series, but we'll take up one theme out of that theme being the different political organizations that came into existence before Congress was formed, right. The reason why I insist on this particular theme is because of a lot of questions asked in the previous years from this broad topic, right. You see, there's a question asked about Gadar party and its members, then there's a question asked about a social reform body, Satya Sodak Samaj was organized for what purpose, right. It was actually started by Jyotirao Phule, right, and for what purpose was it actually started? So that was a question. It's regarding social reform movements. And then there is a question here which talks about the different political bodies, which is going to be the theme of today's discussion, right. So as you can see, this is a very favorite area for UPSC to year on year keep asking questions from, and these are the questions of the last 7 years. From 2017 onwards we have questions here, right. Every year at least one question is being asked from this particular theme, and the nature of the questions are a bit deep. They don't ask very superficial question, who founded Brahmo Samaj? Everybody knows the answer for that, right. Tattva Bodhini Patrika was founded by, everybody knows the answer for that. So that is not the kind of facts that UPSC checks in terms of its questions. It goes to certain levels deeper and then sees whether you are aware of these personalities or not, right. So that's why it makes it really worthwhile to know about the different activities in which Dadabhai Nauroji was associated with, right. So simply don't say that Dadabhai Nauroji came up with this idea of drain theory, right. So that alone is not about his contributions. So a lot has to do about Dadabhai Nauroji in his contributions to freedom struggle, right. Same is the case with Surendranath Banerjee as well, right. So he was a lot more than simply being part of Indian National Congress, right. So are you aware of all of those aspects or not? So it is these aspects which gets tested in the form of these questions, right. So that's going to be the theme for today's discussion, a small area of this large theme which is about political bodies and organizations that were existing in India before the founding of Indian National Congress, right. So let's get into it, and before we get further deeper into this discussion, I need to ask you a question. So you're all aware that Indian National Congress, the first session was held in Bombay in the year of 1885, right. So does it mean that Indian politics actually started only from there? Can we say that it is only with the beginning of Indian National Congress proper mainstream politics came into existence in India? The answer is clear no. Why? Because these members were not anonymous to each other. The members, the delegates who first met in Bombay, they were all known to each other. They were all connected by similar political demands which were ongoing even before the founding of Indian National Congress, right. They were all members of certain organizations, and those organizations were the precursors to Indian National Congress, and these organizations' agenda and demands was what later becomes the agenda of Indian National Congress, right. So when the delegates all met in Bombay in 1885, they did not meet as members of a party called as Congress. They met as members of Madras Mahajan Sabha. They introduced themselves as belonging to Indian National Association. Some of them called themselves as members of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. So it means that very clearly politics in India was existent in India at least for half a century before the founding of Indian National Congress, right. Ever since the day when the British Indian Association came into existence, the politics of some kind or the other had actually started in India, and that was in the year 1852, right. So for around 35 years there was active politics happening in India, and the culmination of all of that was the founding of Indian National Congress. So we need to know about the nature of these associations and bodies. And when I talk about associations, The word association simply means it's a gathering of people with similar common interests. And associations are not something new to India. Caste itself is an association. It's a body of individuals with similar interests. What is the interest? Protecting their caste privileges and maintaining the rituals of taboo with respect to food and drink. Right? So that's the objective of caste as an association. In ancient India, we had associations like trade guilds, right, which had certain purposes behind why it was formed. Right? Let me not go into that, but I'm just trying to point out to you that the idea of associations was not new to Indians. Indians have always been associated in one way or the other with other members, right? But just that these associations formed in the 19th century had a different character to them. These associations were secular associations, whereas caste, guilds, these are all very narrow-minded associations. They had endogamous groupings. They had members only belonging to certain one caste group as members. But these associations formed in the 19th century, they are modern. They had membership crossing all barriers of caste and religion. Right? They were not narrow-minded or parochial in their outlook. Correct? So that's why these were modern political associations, and a lot of credit has to be given to the Englishmen for the beginnings of these associations. Why? It's because of the English education that started percolating in Indian society since the Charter Act of 1813. And there have been steady interventions made by both Christian missionaries as well as by the company officials in promoting Western education and Indian and English language education in India. Right? As a result of which, a lot of Indians, they started understanding the new language of political organization. Right? Because a lot of Indian students, they enroll themselves either in Hindu college in Calcutta, or they join in Elphinstone College in Bombay. And once they join the colleges, now they all team up. Why do they team up? To form societies. They form societies for acquisition of general knowledge. Right? Then they form newspaper clubs. Why? They have to pool in money. They buy newspapers, because newspapers back then were very expensive. Right? So they buy money by pooling. So for that they form societies, and when they buy newspapers, then they start discussions and debates. Right? So this is the first stage for Indians to form associations, and this happened as a result of their interactions in colleges. In fact, many of the members of Bombay Association, which was the association to be formed in Bombay, were members of Elphinstone College. Similarly, members of British Indian Association in Bengal, they were all alumni of Hindu College. Right? So it was these members who, having learned the language of political organization from the English institutions, now they start organizing themselves for political agitations. Right? And the first organization that comes into existence was the British Indian Association, which was set up in Bengal. So before we get in and start discussing about British Indian Association, let me first categorize all these associations that were formed in India into two categories. We can fit these associations into two categories. So some of these associations could be fit into the first phase that was between 1850s and 1870s. Those were the associations of the first type. And then there are the associations of the second type, which came into existence from 1870s onwards. There is a lot of difference between the two. Right? In the first phase, those associations were very self-centered. They only represented their class interest. Right? But in the second phase, the purpose of these associations was very broad-based. Right? The interest that these associations represented was not only the interest of the members of the associations, but it was quite broad-based. So we'll see what that is. And in the first phase, the associations were more or less confined only to presidency headquarters. They were only confined to Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. But in the 1870s onwards, you will find these associations spreading, making deeper inroads into the countryside. Alright? And the methods, the tone in which the agitations were carried out, all of these were different between these two phases. So let's start a discussion with the discussion of the associations of this first phase. So the first body that we will take up for discussion would be the British Indian Association. Right? So this would be a body which actually emerged in the first phase of formation of associations and political bodies. So we have three associations, three different important political bodies which were formed between 1850s and 1870s in three different parts of India. So in Bengal, the association that was formed was British Indian Association. In Bombay, it was called as the Bombay Association. And in Madras, it was called as Madras Native Association. right? So this is a chapter which you find in your spectrum just as 2 pages, and in those 2 pages you don't actually make any sense of the topic at all. It's because it's just a set of facts which has been dumped in 2 pages. And I believe that history is more interesting to read when you have more pages to read, because with more details your capacity to retain all the crucial information is actually better. But whereas when there is only limited information that is given, you end up not understanding and making connections. You simply have a set of details and facts which you are forced to memorize, and that is exactly what happens when you learn this topic from spectrum. No wonder this particular topic actually becomes grey for most of the aspirants. I am sure that most aspirants would not have any idea about the difference between British Indian Association and Indian Association, right? You wouldn't actually know the difference between the first phase and the second phase, right? So that's why the next 40-50 minutes is very important, and please make best use of this next 40-50 minutes, right? So we start our discussion with the first body that was formed in Bengal as a body that represented the interest of the Zamindari group, right? So the name of the body is British Indian Association, and British Indian Association came into existence in the year 1851, right? 1851 or 52, either of the 2 years. Okay, and why did it come into existence? It came into existence because there was a lot of talk in Bengal that the company's charter is up for renewal. In the very next year, the Parliament is just going to make a charter act for renewing the charter of East India Company. And the Zamindars of Bengal, they found an opportunity. They thought this is the best time. Let us send petitions to British Parliament. Let's ask British Parliament to involve Indians also in Viceroy's Council. Right? They wanted native Indians to become a part of Viceroy's Legislative Council. Right? So they sent petitions. But the British Indian Association could not find any success. Even in the Charter Act of 1853, there was no provision for incorporation of Indians into the council, right? And the British Indian Association comprised of the biggest zamindars of Bengal, right? And all of these zamindars were what you can call as the absentee landlords. Since each one of them would probably own 10,000 acres, 20,000 acres, they cannot personally involve in cultivation. So what do they actually do? They have lesser zamindars, they have petty zamindars to whom they would have given the zamindari rights, right? It's a list of intermediaries who work under these large zamindars, and it's these intermediaries who would be located actually in the countryside. So they would do all the collection. They will squeeze as much as money as possible from the peasants, from the tenants, and the money will be transferred to these big zamindars. And where will these zamindars live? They will be simply living in a posh manner in Calcutta, right? So these are absentee zamindars. So these are the richest sections of the Bengal society who were the founders of the British Indian Association, right? And the British Indian Association, even if you have to become a member of that, you have to pay a subscription of 25 rupees. 25 rupees back then was a very heavy amount, right? It was intentionally kept at 25 rupees so as to exclude all the middle classes and the poor, right? It was considered to be a grouping of the elites of Bengal, right? So this was exactly the reason what the Britishers pointed out to them. They said that you represent a small class group, right? And that is why this British Indian Association, it started expanding its network, it started expanding its membership so as to include the educated intelligentsia of Bengal as well. So members like Pyari Chandra Mitra, Harish Chandra Mukherjee, Ram Mohan Ghosh. So who are these 3 random names that I am throwing around? These were all members who were associated with different socio-religious reform movements. So one of them was a member of Brahmo Samaj, the other one was a member of Young Bengal of Derozio, right? So these are all some elite members. We can call them as the intelligentsia of Bengal. So such members were also made as a part of British Indian Association, so as to give a semblance that this association is not an exclusive body of only zamindars. It represents better sections of the Bengal society as well, right? So that is how the British Indian Association started its career, with a failed attempt of petitioning the Parliament so as to provide native representation in Viceroy's Council. Since that did not materialize, the next demand that was taken up by the British Indian Association was to hold examination for entry into civil services simultaneously in India, because I am sure you would all know that as per the Charter Act of 1853, the competition system was introduced, right? So if anybody was to enter into Indian civil services, from now onwards they have to write an examination, but the problem is the examination is conducted only in London. So Indians had to travel all the way to London to write and appear in this examination. So that was found to be very, very disadvantageous for Indians. So that was also another demand of this British Indian Association, so as to put forward this idea that we not only are interested about zamindars and landholders' interest, but we are also interested about the interests of other educated groups of Bengal as well, right? So that was a second objective that was put forward by British Indian Association. So first objective was to have representation in Viceroy's Council. The second objective was to have simultaneous examinations conducted in India, right? So this was the initial set of demands. When I say demand, it was more like petitions. It was more like letters written to British authorities both in India as well as abroad, right? So as to plead with them, so as to pray to them to give in to the concessions, to give in to the demands of the British Indian Association. So this was the nature of early politics of British Indian Association, right? So not only this, they also slowly added to their demands a few other objectives as well. One was they wanted the salt monopoly of East India Company to be removed. That was the same objective of Mahatma Gandhi when he launched his civil disobedience movement, right? Because the company had the sole monopoly of manufacture of salt. So that's what Gandhi did by breaking the salt monopoly. So what Gandhi did in 1930 was already made as a part of British Indian Association's demand in the 1860s, right? They wanted the salt monopoly to be taken out, all right? So these were the initial demands that were put forward, but the British Indian Association had certain problems. Okay, the problem is whenever it becomes a question of tenants versus zamindars, the association would naturally toe the line of zamindars. So as a result of that, what happens? They become enemies of 95% of the Bengal population, because back then 95% of the Bengal population were all farmers. They were all landless farmers, tenants, who were simply occupying the land of these zamindars, right? So in the 1860s onwards, you will find the British government, the colonial state in India, coming up with pro-tenant legislations. What are these pro-tenant legislations? For that, you should know the basic idea of zamindari system. What is the zamindari system's basic idea? The basic idea is you have the colonial state, right, and you have zamindar, and you have the tenant farmer, right? The demand of colonial state on the zamindar is fixed. What is it? 11% of the total revenue can be kept in the hands of zamindar. 89% of the total revenue collected should be given to the company, to the government. This is the core principle of zamindari system. Now what is it, the relationship between the tenant and the zamindar? The tenant, there is no stipulation. So basically the tenant, anything can be taken out from the hands of the tenant farmer. This is the principle of zamindari, right? So zamindar can, as much as he wants, he can extract from the tenant. As long as he pays this 89% of the total revenue to the company, he can have any amount of demands on the tenants, right? Don't you think it's exploitative? And this exploitation was what the British government tries to rectify. How? It brings pro-tenant legislations. It tries to fix the ceiling limit as to how much the zamindar can squeeze from the tenant, right? So that is why a Bengal tenancy bill was about to be introduced, fixing the maximum demand that the tenant has to pay to the zamindar. This was totally against the zamindari's interests, right? And not only that, there was also talk in 1870 that even this promise of a fixed demand of zamindari system will be done away with, right? The British government was thinking of imposing what is called as cess beyond this 89%, which means that the core promise that was inbuilt into this zamindari system is now going to be done away with, which means again a threat to the zamindari interests. So this is when the British Indian Association showed its true colors. It organized demonstrations everywhere against such tenancy reforms. So basically what did it do? It alienated itself with 95% of the Indian population, of the Bengal population. And that is when the next association came into existence in Bengal, which is the Indian Association. We will discuss about it later after we are done discussing about the other associations in other different provinces, right? So as of now, you can understand the British Indian Association was the first spokesperson of politics in India. So the British Indian Association represented the interest of zamindars and the educated intelligentsia of Bengal, right? And I just forgot to mention about it. the British Indian Association, the members, the founding members, they also had a publication, they had a newspaper that they ran, which was called as the Hindu Patriot. Right? So Hindu Patriot was basically a mouthpiece of British Indian Association. It only reflected the zamindari interests. So British Indian Association, its main demands was to have Indian representation in the councils. Though it was not actually done in the Charter Act of 1853, it was later done in the Indian Councils Act. The first Councils Act actually created representation for Indians in the councils. And who do you think the first few members were? The first few members in the councils, they were all members of British Indian Association, because they were the richest zamindars, the richest rajas. Right? So it was the same members who would also find entry into Viceroy's councils. And the British Indian Association also made demands for holding simultaneous examinations for civil services also in India as well. And in 1865, I think, a proposal was brought by the British Parliament, British government, as a result of which the maximum age of entry into civil services was reduced. It was reduced to 21 years. So beyond 21, you become ineligible to appear in civil service exam. So that was also found to be disadvantageous for this educated class of Bengal population. So British Indian Association also raised its voice against these moves as well. Right? But even though it did all of this, it slowly lost the support of masses. Why? Because of its stand against the interest of tenants and riots. Alright, and not only that, this British Indian Association, its entire activities were confined only to Calcutta. It failed to set up branches in all other Mufassil towns, in all other suburban towns, right? Because there are so many other important towns in Bengal which were coming into prominence. Calcutta is not the only town. You had Dhaka, you had Chittagong, you had Birbhum, right? And Murshidabad is another important town. In all these towns, now the benefits of Western education have started percolating. Right? So a lot of graduates, earlier they used to come to Calcutta, study, and they used to practice and they used to work in and around Calcutta. But now Calcutta is becoming too crowded. There isn't too much of opportunities available to practice at the bar of the Calcutta High Court. Right? Now what happens is, a lot of lawyers, after graduating in Calcutta, now what do? They go back to their districts. They go back to their hometown, and there they start practicing. So that's how there is a lot of political consciousness that's emerging in and around the towns of Calcutta. Okay, in other towns, and British Indian Association did not spread its branches. It was more confined to Calcutta. It was more confined to the interests of the richest sections, as a result of which it could not greatly connect to the masses. Right? And not only that, it had a high subscription fee of 25 rupees, which people cannot pay. Right? So that's how slowly British Indian Association fizzled out, and its position was actually occupied by another association that we'll come across, which was called as the Indian Association. Right? But before we get into that, let's also look at what was happening in other presidencies, what was happening in Bombay. So to understand about the politics of Bombay, just try to understand about the politics of Ambani and Adani. Have you ever seen them questioning the government, agitating against the government? No, they wouldn't do, because every business group would want to maintain friendly relationship with whichever political party is at power, right? So same is the case with the politics of Bombay as well. The reason is because Bombay had four predominant communities. One was the Parsi, the other one was the Gujarati Seths, third was Maratha Brahmans from interiors of Maharashtra, and the fourth was the Muslim merchants. Right? And all of them require the support of government in one way or the other. So that is why you will never find harsh tone of politics coming from Bombay. Right? So soft was their demands that even Lord Lytton, who is so hated across India, Lord Lytton has given a very favorable impression about the people of Bombay to Queen. Right? He has written a letter to the Queen saying that the Bombay subjects are the best of Her Majesty's subjects. In fact, when a lot of disturbances were going on in Bengal because of the agitational nature of politics of Bengal, Lord Dufferin even had a plan. He thought that why don't we shift our capital from Calcutta to Bombay. Bombay was a very serene place with very friendly relationship between Englishmen and the natives. Right? So such was the profile of Bombay, in which the Bombay Association was formed. And naturally, the demands put by the Bombay Association was also not very powerful. Right? After all, the first demand put by the Bombay Association was, when the renewal of charter came, it was a similar demand to that of British Indian Association. So Bombay Association simply asked for more native representation in the councils, and it did not happen. After that, Bombay Association went into a state of inactivity, and then happened the revolt of 1857, as a result of which the Bombay Association got scared. Oh my God, What if Britishers start mistaking us? So they did not dare to speak anything against the British government at all. And then came the 1860s. 1860s was a time when American Civil War broke out, as a result of which the entire cotton supplies from America to London stopped. So London needed new markets for cotton, and that market was nothing but Bombay. So 1860s was a decade when all the rich industrialists of Bombay were all minting money because of American Civil War, right? And it was the same industrialists who were the founders and members of Bombay Association. So their entire pursuit was in trade and commerce and not in politics. That's why the entire 1860s was a period of inactivity for Bombay Association. It had to actually take new young members, Ferozshah Mehta, K.T. Telang, Badruddin Tyabji. So these were three young radicals who had to come all the way from London once again to Bombay, and it's only with the arrival of these young blood, now politics picks up pace at Bombay. Why? It's because these young men, they had their first training and exposure to politics in London, because they were all a part of what was called as the East India Association, right? So it's time we get to know something about East India Association. East India Association was a body for politics which was actually started in London by Dadabhai Naoroji, right? So Dadabhai Naoroji was a Parsi, very successful businessman who spends his time between India and London, and when he was in London, he was able to actually understand that the entire politics was supposed to be conducted in London, not in India, because he felt Indian policies were dictated by British government. And where was British government? In London. So if only the British government itself can be changed, then the Indian policies can be changed. And how can British government be changed? It's by impressing upon the British electorate. So Dadabhai Naoroji's plan was to form a body in London and make that as a platform to campaign for the right British government in the minds of the English electorate. If only the English electorate can be persuaded to vote for whichever party will be sympathetic towards Indian interests, then the real change can happen in India. So that was the idea of East India Association. That was what Dadabhai Naoroji wanted to achieve, and having that as a base, having that as the objective, that is why Dadabhai Naoroji wanted to have London as the base of political activities, right? And he also wanted to co-opt British Englishmen also as a part of his organization, because he clearly knew that without the support of Englishmen, his political enterprise in London wouldn't be a success. So that's why membership of East India Association was open to all all Englishmen as well. And all English ICS officers, English servants, after their tenure in India, actually they consider that as a retirement posting. Simply they come and become members of East India Association. So there was a lot of representation from Englishmen in the East India Association, right? So this can be asked as a question in your exam. In prelims, a statement can be given: Englishmen were not allowed to become a member of East India Association, right? So you'll be confused back then, but don't be confused. Yes, Englishmen were allowed to be the members of East India Association, right? In fact, the very first president of East India Association was a member of British Parliament. All right. So East India Association was supposed to operate from London, impressing upon the people of England, but at the same time it was supposed to open branches in all three different presidencies, right? In Madras, Bombay, as well as in Bengal. All right, but was it really successful in opening branches across all the presidencies? No, it was not, because both Madras and Bengal responded very mildly to the advances made by the East India Association. They felt that East India Association was more dominated by Bombay people, so they considered it to be a Bombay affair, right? So that's why East Indian Association was not as successful in Madras and Bengal as it was in Bombay. In Bombay, it was able to open a lot of branches, and it was able to mobilize a lot of funds. So its entire operations in India was basically collect funds, transmit it to London, so that members like Dadabhai Naoroji and all other Indians who are there in London can carry agitations on behalf of Indians, right? So this was the entire plan, right? But it proved to be a failure in the long run. It's because of the dominance of Englishmen inside East Indian Association. As I told you, the membership was open to Englishmen, and now more and more Englishmen became members of East India Association, as a result of which its entire goals, policies were all became anti-Indian. For example, I'll tell you, when a controversy was going on in India in 1883, it was called as the Ilbert Bill controversy, right? So what was that controversy? I hope you already have an idea about it. Ilbert Bill controversy is about whether Englishmen in India can be tried by Indian magistrates, right? Lord Ripon was in support of that. He wanted Indians to try Englishmen, right? But there was a counter agitation organized by all Englishmen, either both in India as well as in London, against Indians being given the same racial equality as that of Englishmen, that they will be allowed to try Englishmen, right? So there was a lot of counter agitations, and this East Indian Association actually passed resolutions against this ill-bought bill, which means that such was the dominance of Englishmen within East India Association that they could even mobilize opinion against something that was favorable for Indians, right? So what I am trying to say is that the entire politics of East Indian Association, it was started initially so as to press for advantages for Indians, but over time its membership was finally captured by Englishmen, because more and more retired English officers now coming to London all find themselves as a part of East Indian Association. So it is finally their voice that matters. East Indian Association was a failure. The one good thing that came out of this was Dadabhai Nauroji's efforts to start a newspaper called as Voice of India, right? So what was this Voice of India? Voice of India was basically, it's an effort of Dadabhai to make sure that people of different presidencies get to know about people of other presidencies, because in Madras entire affairs, entire news will be written in Tamil newspapers, native press. In Bengal it will all be written in Bengali. In Maharashtra, Bombay, it's all written in Marathi. If that's the case, people of other presidencies will not get to know about each other. That's why Dadabhai Nauroji starts a paper called as Voice of India, in which he takes articles from regional press, regional newspapers, translates it into English, makes it a compilation, and then he sells it to the people of India, whoever subscribes to it, right? So this is an important initiative started by Dadabhai Nauroji, called as the Voice of India, a journal which was started by him, right? So this was the situation of politics in Bombay in the first phase from 1850 to 1870. Bombay Association was started, which did not prove to be a very strong force opposing the Britishers and their policies, right? And the East Indian Association, which was actually started in London, was more successful in Bombay by setting up its branches here than in other presidencies, all right? And the new generation of leaders like Feroz Shah Mehta, K.T. Telang, Badruddin Tyabji, who have now come here, they see Bombay Association and they feel very, very disillusioned with its activities. They feel that it's not as active as how the Bengal bodies are, right? So that's why they will form the next generation of bodies in the next phase. We'll get to see what that is, all right? And in addition to that, in Madras, a body will be formed which is called as the Madras Native Association, right? With the same purpose. See, all these bodies, Bombay Association, Madras Native Association, British Indian Association, all of these will be formed at the same time to petition the Parliament when the Charter Act of 1853 was just round the corner, right? So Madras Native Association was also quite soft spoken. Except for the demand for inclusion of Indians in the councils, there wasn't any other demand that was coming from Madras Native Association. So its first president was Lakshmi Naraslu Chetty. Lakshmi Naraslu Chetty was the first president of Madras Native Association. Bombay Association, the first president was Jijabai Jamshedji, right? And British Indian Association, the first president was Radhakanta Dev. He's a big zamindar, right? So these names are something that it is worth remembering, right? Now you know that the objective of formation of all these associations and who were the important members associated with these associations. Now let's move on to the next phase of formation of political bodies, which is the second phase. In the second phase of associations, there were different associations that came up in different parts of India. I'll just tell you what are the names of these associations. In Bengal, we had Indian Association. In Bombay, we had two associations. One was in Poona, called as Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. The other body was called as the Bombay Presidency Association. And in Madras, the new body, which replaced the earlier Madras Native Association, the new body is called as Madras Mahajana Sabha, right? So these are the four new bodies, right? Earlier we saw three bodies of the previous phase. Now there are four bodies of this new phase, right? So let's start discussing about them. First, let's focus our attention on Bengal, right? In Bengal, we have already seen how British Indian Association was losing its touch with the masses. It was more self-centered about its own zamindari interests. It was not concerned about tenant interests, and moreover its subscription rate was very high. It did not have branches into the interiors, as a result of which British Indian Association was simply not available for all sections of the society, right? So this gap was now to be filled. So who was going to fill this gap? That is when the first replacement body was formed. It was formed by Ghosh brothers, Shishir Kumar Ghosh, Hemant Kumar Ghosh. These two brothers, maybe you don't know their names, but definitely you would be familiar with the publication of theirs, which is called as the Amrita Bazar Patrika, right? So Amrita Bazar Patrika was the publication brought out by Shishir Kumar Ghosh and Hemant Kumar Ghosh, and they started a new organization as a replacement for British Indian Association. That new body was called as India League, right? But this India League did not really succeed, and many of the members of India League, they went out and they formed a new body called as Indian Association, and this is the most successful body until the founding of Indian National Congress in Bengal. It was this body which really created a energized political condition in Bengal, right? It was because of this body that Britishers came to hate the Bengal politics altogether. It was quite agitational, right? So let's have a look at the affairs of Indian Association. Indian Association was started by Surendranath Banerjee. Okay, and why was it started? The main reason is because English education, since it's been around 50 years since English education and Western education has been introduced in India, right? It was Lord Macaulay who really started pushing forward Western education in India. So it's been a very long time, and the fruits of English education has now even come into all the Mufassil towns and the interior districts, because a lot of teachers, they went, they learned, they studied in Calcutta, and now they have been appointed as teachers in small towns. And similarly, there are lawyers who are there in all the Mufassil towns practicing law in local courts. There are doctors who are now appointed to the local interiors, right? And all these educated intelligentsia, and there are journalists as well. So all these educated intelligentsia right now, they want some platform for politics, right? Calcutta alone cannot be the place where politics can happen. There has to be some platform for politics even in Dhaka, in Rajshahi, Mymensingh, Chittagong, and all those interior places as well, right? And that was what exactly Indian Association provided. Surendranath Banerjee was a very energetic man. He was a very successful man in the sense he was selected to the ICS. He cleared the civil services examination, right? And he was posted in India, and while he was in his posting on probation, he was actually dismissed from service, right? He was dismissed, saying that he is inefficient, right? Imagine, it was so difficult to enter into civil services back then with all the entry barriers and all of that. You had to go to London to write an exam. So he did all of that, but still he was thrown out of his job. And now, as an angry young man, he starts this association called as Indian Association, and he has already become the leader of students in Bengal, right? Every time he is arrested, students just go on a frenzy in Calcutta. They go on agitating for the release of Surendranath Banerjee. So such was his charisma among the students. He has really emerged as a leader of the Bengal students, right? So it's Surendranath Banerjee, full of energy and enthusiasm, just goes on a tour across all parts of Bengal, and wherever he goes, he makes it a point to open new branches of Indian Association. And the subscription of Indian Association was just kept at 5 rupees, so that all sections of these intelligentsia can all easily join. And later this 5 rupee subscription was even brought down to 1 rupee, so that even farmers, poor farmers, can also join in Indian Association, right? And the objectives that the Indian Association it championed for was also some of the objectives which satisfied, and the objectives which the Indian Association it took, and the agenda that Indian Association had was also for the interest of a large section of the society, right? One, during Lord Lytton's time, the entry for civil services was reduced. The age was reduced from 21 to 19. Imagine, if you have crossed 19, you become ineligible to appear in civil service exam. So Surendranath Banerjee's Indian Association agitated against that. And in municipalities, except in Calcutta, you go to the interiors of Bengal, in all those towns where there are municipalities there is no system of election. After all, it's the English collector or any other officer, British officer, who will decide the agenda of the municipalities, where drains should be constructed, where cleaning should be done. All that is not to be decided by elected representatives. It is all to be decided by unelected British official. So Surendranath Banerjee was against that. He wanted an elective system for municipalities in the interior towns. And not only that, the best success of Indian Association was in mobilizing the peasants because that was the time when the British government had introduced Bengal Tenancy Bill, and the draft was circulated for public opinion, and Indian Association just took the provisions of the bill to each and every farmer in the countryside. It organized mass meetings, right? 2,000, 3,000 farmers used to assemble in one place, and members of Indian Association used to read out the provisions of draft bill, make the farmers understand the good pros and cons of the bill. So that was a service done by Indian Association for the cause of the farmers, right? And that is the reason why farmers joined Indian Association in huge numbers. And in mobilizing the farmers, the Indian Association used various techniques which will become something normal in the later stages of Indian national movement. Right? During Gandhian phase, you will find a lot of mobilization techniques used by Gandhi, where prayer meetings, bhajans will all be held. Right? Similarly, in Indian Association as well, there will be songs that will be sung, there will be public performances, and farmers will all be gathered to watch those performances. And in the middle, while the songs were all being sung, suddenly a leader of Indian Association, he'll just go onto the stage and he'll start explaining to the farmers about the pros and cons of the bill, right? So all these kinds of modern methods of mobilization was all experimented even before Congress was formed by Indian Association, right? So that's why we say that Indian Association was really a successful organization, and not only in spreading its branches just within Bengal. Surendranath Banerjee was even touring all across India, right? Branches of Indian Association were even set up as far as Punjab as well. Why? It's because these Bengalis, since they were the first to get the benefits of education, they could get into various employment avenues. Like for example, whenever railway tracks, new tracks extend to Punjab and new stations are created in Punjab, now you need to have station masters and all clerical posts, right? And who other than the Bengalis, because they were the first to take to the learning of English. So you find a lot of Bengali population spread across all different parts of India, right? So in order to address them, Surendranath Banerjee makes a trip. He goes on a tour up to Punjab, and wherever he goes, sets up branches of Indian Association, right? So it was Surendranath Banerjee who first made Indian Association as a pan-Bengal body, as also a pan-Indian body to a limited extent. All right. So from Bengal, now we turn our attention towards Poona, right? In Poona, a new body comes into existence, which is called as the Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. So let's have a look into that. To understand about the politics of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha, we need to first understand about the Brahmans of Poona, right? So these Brahmans of Poona have been enjoying a great status of power and prestige under the Peshwas. But with the downfall of the Peshwas after the Third Anglo-Maratha War, right, the entire institution of Peshwa was abolished, and with that came the degradation of these Poona Brahmans. So that's when they decided to swiftly adapt to the new dispensation. They started learning English, Western education, as a result of which they were able to get employment as clerks under the new English rulers. And one such clerk by the name of Vasudev Balwant Phadke, right? So for 15 years he was a clerk, and all of a sudden he just abandoned his post, went to the hills, went into hiding. And what was his objective? His objective was to simply overthrow the English rule. And in the eyes of Balwant Phadke, the English rule is synonymous with that of the Mughal rule, and he felt himself to be a deputy of Shivaji Maharaj, right? So he felt that it was his responsibility to overthrow the Englishmen from the Maratha territory. Right. So what was his modus operandi? He organized attacks on English buildings, offices, establishments. And did he receive any help? Yes. A group of tribals in the hills by the name of Ramoshis, they followed him as a leader and followed his orders, and they also took to plundering, stealing, just the same way how Shivaji and his troops used to do. Right. The main source of income for Maratha polity back then during the days of Shivaji was what? Plunder. That was same what Balwant Phadke and Ramoshis were up to, right? But did it have a continuous success? No. It's because the Britishers came down heavily, and finally Phadke was arrested and he was given life imprisonment and he was transported to Andamans, right? What's the whole point of discussing this issue? The discussion is basically Vasudev Phadke was receiving the support of Poona Brahmans, right? And Poona Brahmans, in the publications that they ran press like Shivaji. Shivaji was the name of a Maratha journal, and then there was another press by the name of Indu Prakash. In all these journals, there were voices of support for Phadke expressed by the Poona Brahmans, right? And these press had even gone to the extent of saying that what Phadke did was not wrong. He was waging a righteous war, right? So all these kind of opinions given by the Poona Brahmans made them appear seditious in the eyes of the Britishers, and this was a suspicion that the Britishers will always harbor, right? Even Tilak will always be suspected of disloyalty by the Britishers. All the different trials to which Balagangadhar Tilak will be subjected to in the future all arises out of this perennial suspicion that Britishers always harbor towards Poona Brahmans. They were called as seditious Brahmins by the British authorities. Why? All as a result of this writing where support was sympathized in favor of Balwant Phadke, right? And there were counter voices coming from English press. English press started writing saying that these Brahmins should be punished accordingly. All of their posts should be taken from their hands. They should all be dismissed wholesale from occupying all government posts. So now being made as the object of attack, that is when the Brahmins of Poona, they realize that it's time they form an organization to protect themselves. And that organization that was formed so as to protect the interests of the Poona Brahmins, right? That organization was what was called as Poona Sarvajanik Sabha, right? And the membership was made subject to certain conditions. The condition was that if you want to become a member of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha, you have to at least be backed by 50 members of your caste or from your locality or your profession, right? So in a way, the first 95 members who join Poona Sarvajanik Sabha can in a way be called as representing 6,000 people, 5,000 people, correct? So this was how the first members of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha were inducted. So this was like a rule. If you were to become a member of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha, you should have the backing of at least 50 members of your group, right? And it was a majority of the membership was actually composed of Poona Brahmans, right? And they were all led by a very able another Poona Brahman by the name of Mahadev Govind Ranade. So M.G. Ranade was actually working as a judge in a court, right? He was basically an employee of the of the British government. And Mahadev Govind Ranade was actually in Poona when all these disturbances of Phadke's was going on, right? And the Englishmen had deep suspicions over M.G. Ranade's activities. So that's why he was transferred from Poona. He was transferred to Nasik, and from Nasik he was transferred to a very distant district called as Dhulia, right? So what I'm trying to say is this M.G. Ranade was so much hated by the Britishers as if he was the one who was guiding the activities of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. Alright, so he was a tall leader of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. You can just remember that point, right? Though he was a British employee, government employee, he was also the leader of these members of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. So what were the different agenda of this body, Poona Sarvajanik Sabha? It was very, very vocal in various regards. First, it was very vocal with respect to Ilbert Bill controversy. The Ilbert Bill that was introduced so as to allow Indians to try Englishmen, right? So Poona Sarvajanik Sabha came out very, very openly in support of Ilbert Bill. Remember, these are all the days when Indian National Congress was not even existing, and the association in Bombay was totally defunct. The Bombay Association was totally useless during this time. So in entire Maharashtra, it was a very firebrand politics, agitational politics with a tone of anger which was actually put forward by Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. So this Ilbert Bill controversy became a very, very important issue for Poona Sarvajanik Sabha to express its opinion, right? So this was one important agenda. And another important agenda of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha was that it demanded the permanent zamindari system of Bengal to be extended to Bombay, because in Bombay the kind of revenue system that existed was Rayatwari system, and in Rayatwari system every year or every 2 years once the revenue demand on the peasants can be continuously be increased. So which means that it's pretty insecure, right? There could be more and more demands, there could be more and more burden which can be put on the peasants. So that's why Poona Sarvajanik Sabha was very vocal in demanding that there should be a ceiling, there should be a permanent ban there should be some kind of a permanency of tenure. So it looked for an example, and it found that the zamindari system in Bengal was an apt example. In Bengal, the zamindari system once for all has fixed the maximum revenue demand. So Poona Sarvajanik Sabha expected such kind of a zamindari settlement to be made for Maharashtra as well, for Deccan as well, right? So demanding zamindari system to be extended to Maharashtra, to Deccan, was another agenda of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. And not only that, the Poona Sarvajanik Sabha was very, very active with the riots. Riots means farmers, right? In the Rayatwari system, the farmer has to satisfy the British demand for revenue, right? If I am a farmer, every year I have to pay some money to the British government, and let's say my produce for a year is very, very poor. In that case, now what's the option available to me? I do not have money to pay to the Britisher. Now what do? I run to a money lender who's called as a sahukar, right? Saukar. So I go to a sahukar, I borrow money from him, right? And then I go and pay to the Britisher. And finally what happens is I get into a debt trap and I'm not able to repay the debt, right? In that case, the money lender goes to the court, he gets an eviction order, and finally he chases me from my land, right? So this is the normal system in Rayatwari system. In Rayatwari system, this is how a Rayat loses control of his land. So there will be such kind of cases, litigations, which will be filed by the money lender in the courts, and these cases will just go on for years and years, right? So what Poona Sarvajanik Sabha does is that it organizes courts, it organizes enquiries and courts at village levels. It brings money lenders and the riots together, and it negotiates on their behalf and finally arrives at an amicable solution between them, right? So these are all some of the activities that were taken up in favor of the riots by the Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. Okay, so understand that when Bombay city associations were reluctant to enter into the countryside, when Bombay Association confined its activities only to the city of Bombay, and that too after some time it had become defunct, look at the vibrancy with which Poona Sarvajanik Sabha functions. It was able to penetrate into the countryside, and it was able to take up a lot of issues which actually bothered the peasants. So just like how in Bengal the Indian Association was taking up peasants' issues, similarly in Maharashtra, in Bombay, it was Poona Sarvajanik Sabha which was fulfilling that same role, right? And not only that, Poona Sarvajanik Sabha was also advocating for unity between Indian Association. It sent its delegates to Indian Association to Bengal so as to find avenues for common cooperation, right? And there were moments of common cooperation, and I'll tell you what it is. During the time of Lord Lytton, Lytton had done a lot of unpopular policies, right? When famine was ravaging in India, he had sent an army to fight a useless war in Afghanistan, right? And in addition to that, he had also done the mistake of abolishing all cotton duties. What is a cotton duty? Basically, there are cotton mills in Bombay, they manufacture cotton textiles, and then there are cotton mills in London, in Lancashire in London, they also manufacture cotton textiles. So the price of London textile is actually cheap. So when they come to India, when they are imported to India, import duties are imposed, right? Import duties, just like how today if we were to import foreign cars, some 30%, 40% customs duty is imposed, right? So as to give a level playing field for Indian manufacturers. Similarly, until Lytton came to India, there was a cotton import duty imposed on Lancashire cotton, right? But when Lytton came to India, the Lancashire lobby, it was able to influence the Viceroy here in India, and Lytton had abolished those cotton duties, right? As a result of which now Indian manufacturers are going to be affected, right? And it's not only the Indian manufacturers who are going to be affected, even the government in India is going to be affected. How? By abolishing the customs duties, now the valuable tax which could have come to the government is now going to not come to the government, right? Now you have to offset that loss of revenue. How? Lytton introduces a new tax called as license tax. What is a license tax? If you are a doctor, you want to open a clinic, you have to pay some tax. All professionals are now subjected to a tax called as license tax, right? So basically, abolishing cotton duties has affected the cotton industries of Bombay, and in return Lytton has imposed what is called as license tax, which is now going to affect all the professionals of Bengal. So this is how Lytton's tenure becomes a unifying ground for all these associations distributed across different parts of India. If not for Lytton, there is no reason why Poona Sarvajanik Sabha and Indian Association in Bengal would have to cooperate with each other. It's because of the same hardship created by Lord Lytton. On one hand, he abolished customs duties, and to compensate for the revenue, he had imposed license tax, and it affected people of both the presidencies. And the associations which are active in both the presidencies are Poona Sarvajanik Sabha and Indian Association. Now they find reasons to cooperate with each other. This is how the early phase, in the first phase, we saw fragmented activities of these associations. Each association operated on its own. They operated in silos. There was no common ground between them. But now you see, the associations, they start cooperating with each other. They start having some common goals. Now they have common plans to send delegations to London so as to petition the British government, right? So this is the activities of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. Coming to the last two bodies, the Madras Mahajan Sabha and Bombay Presidency Association, these were also organizations formed in the second phase, but they are no way agitative or very vocal as Poona Sarvajanik Sabha or the Indian Association, right? So this Madras Mahajan Sabha was formed by Anandacharlu G. Subramanya Iyer, right? And I'll tell you what was the purpose of forming Madras Mahajan Sabha. Basically, during the viceroyalty of Lord Ripon, a lot of associations have started coming up in various parts of Tamil Nadu, in various parts of Madras, right? It's to have a united platform for all these different small associations coming in different cities and towns in Madras. They wanted all of it to unite and speak in one voice. So for that they need one singular platform, right? And that one platform was what was Madras Mahajan Sabha, right? It is not going to organize any demonstrations or protests or public meetings as Indian Association, nor is it going to come down heavily against the British government through speeches like Poona Sarvajanik Sabha, right? These are all, both Bombay Presidency Association as well as Madras Mahajan Sabha, they are quite soft spoken, very mellowed. Their only work is to coordinate the other local associations, all right? Same was the case with Bombay Presidency Association. It is better than the Bombay Association of the previous years, but it is no way as extremist as that of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha, right? Because the members who were the founders of Bombay Presidency Association, basically the Firoz Shah Mehta and Badruddin Tyabji and K.T. Telang, for them, again, politics was a part-time affair, right? Firoz Shah Mehta was a very successful lawyer practicing in Bombay, and for Firoz Shah Mehta, every day that he attends a meeting of Bombay Presidency Association would amount to a loss of revenue, which he could have otherwise earned by practicing his advocacy, right? So these members, for them, their first priority was their other professions, and not only that, Bombay Presidency Association was formed only in 1885, and Mahajan Sabha was formed only in 1884. These were all very close to the formation of Indian National Congress, right? So that's why they did not have something very individualistic about their action as such, because everything else will be made as a part of Congress activity in the upcoming years. Whereas the Indian Association or Poona Sarvajanik Sabha was all started much earlier, so they had an independent existence for a period of time. But these bodies couldn't really demonstrate their individuality, and slowly they will find themselves merged into the Congress plan of action. Alright, so this is all about this particular topic, right? So what is very important here is the different associations formed in two different phases. British Indian Association formed for zamindari protection, for the interest of landed classes, right? The first president was Radhakanta Deb, right? And it came up with this publication which was called as the Hindu Patriot. And in that same phase, in the Bombay Presidency, an association came into existence which was called as the Bombay Association. Its first president was Jamshedji Jija Boy. Alright, and in Madras during the same time, the Madras Native Association came into existence, and its founder was G. Lakshmi Narasulu Chetty. Right, so this is the facts that you have to remember. And when it comes to the second phase, the most powerful of organization would be the Indian Association of Surendranath Banerjee, and it had its own publication called as Bengali. Right, it had its own newspaper called as the Bengali. Alright, and in Maharashtra, a very vocal, a very dominant association that came into existence was Poona Sarvajanik Sabha, which actually raised its voice against the Vernacular Press Act imposed by Lord Lytton. It was against the Ilbert Bill, it was in support of Ilbert Bill. It was against the license tax of Lord Lytton. It was against customs duty suspension. Right, so Poona Sarvajanik Sabha was very vocal. Right, and it was always in Poona where the voice of extremism was always higher. Even if you see, the Congress split happened at Surat, right, in 1907. The 1907 annual session of Congress was supposed to be held at Poona, but they were so scared of holding this session at Poona. Okay, as a result of which the venue was changed to Surat, and even there the Poona extremists came all the way to Surat, and that is where the split happened. Right, so Poona was like the hotspot of firebrand type of politics, all because of the activism of Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. Alright, and during the same phase, in Madras we had Madras Mahajan Sabha, which was formed. It was just a body to consolidate all the associational activities that was happening in the Madras presidency during that point of time. Right, and in Bombay, the Bombay Presidency Association was formed in the same year when Congress first session was held in 1885. Right, it was formed by these Feroz Mehta, K.D. Telang and Badruddin Tyabji. Right, and it could not become as vocal and strong as the Poona Sarvajanik Sabha. Alright, so these are all the ideas that you have to remember in your mind regarding this particular topic on political associations before Indian National Congress. Alright, so we'll meet in the next video. So thank you.